Have you checked the children? Your little Mesa.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if you please, you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reezy, baby. And baby, can you dig your man? I know a lot of people did not dig that most recent stand, and yes, we will be getting to that here on the horror show in the very, very near future. Unfortunately, with Valentine's Day weekend and some other things going on, myself, Marsha Parker, and Cecil Laird will be getting to that full season spoilers review, the full series, giving our thoughts on it. We've talked about the initial episode, but this is the first in a 3-part series, and I gotta give a shout out to Maddie Jorson, I believe it is, who sent me a couple unmade versions of The Stand, because just even getting the 1994 miniseries was a monumental accomplishment, because they had been trying to do it basically since the book came out in the late 70s, 78 I believe was when it was initially published. And just to give a little history about that, there were basically like 3 major attempts at the project, which was basically we had George Romero initially, and then it segued into a different director, and we're going to give history about that first iteration that eventually became, after a long-winded bit of rewrites and jumping between networks and theatrical, small screen, all this different stuff, it ended up being the ABC miniseries. And then the later version that they tried to do had Ben Affleck attached at one particular point, and then there was a third attempt at it, which Josh Boone, who actually ended up eventually being part of the CBS All Access version that we just did, that was basically the third iteration. So we had one previous attempt before the ABC series, then we had 2 attempts in between that one and the most recent one that just concluded this past Thursday. And so I'm here in this first part of this 3-parter series just to give a little history about this first failed attempt at bringing The Stand to screen. And so the discussions, as I said initially, went all the way back. You can sense my exuberance. I'm like jumping all over the place. But so the initial discussions actually started in the late 1970s when King was first discussing with a man that he admired a great deal, George Romero, about basically doing Salem's Lot. And that obviously didn't end up happening because Tobe Hooper did that miniseries for television. But those discussions continued into 1980 as they were basically starting to prep Creepshow. Because in 1980, I believe it was called Cine Fantastique. It was a publication back then. And in 1980, in that same installment of Cine Fantastique, they announced George Romero doing both Creepshow and The Stand in that same issue. So it seemed like it was pretty much a done deal. King was going to script it himself. The problem, we know Stevie K. Now, he did do a pretty fine job on the script for the 1994 version, in my estimation, but King is notorious for having difficulty adapting his own work because it's often so lengthy and the characters are so rich that the act of condensing, it's like a drowning your baby sort of situation for him, and it's one that he really struggles with, in my opinion. Sometimes it works, Pet Sematary and The Stand for the most part. I know there's a lot of detractors of the 94 version. I personally love it. But yeah, it doesn't always work out, and fingers firmly crossed that Lisi's story is solid. But he did all of these different writes of it. I think there was 4, maybe 5 different drafts, and they ranged anywhere from 400 to 700 pages in length, and that's for a script. And you guys know that it's typically a page a minute for a script, so you're like, King, this obviously needs to be a miniseries as opposed to, something made theatrically, unless you're gonna like Harry Potter that shit and do like 8 movies or 7 movies or whatever. But that was obviously not the case back then. They're like, can you get it down to, maybe 2-hour installments, and we'll give you a 2-parter, which I think would kind of make sense to a degree, because you could do, just the onset of the plague and Captain Trips and all that stuff, and basically maybe get them all the way to starting society in Boulder, and then the second half is the rebuilding of the society in Boulder, and over in New Vegas, and just the beginning of the plotting and the sending of spies and all that different stuff, and the ultimate confrontation, stand, be true, stand, all that stuff. So King unfortunately struggled with this, despite the fact that a gentleman whose name I have to consult my notes, by the name of Richard P. Lappenstein. So he had this company called Laurel Entertainment, and he was really good buddies with George Romero. So he had been behind producing Dawn and Day of the Dead, but in between he also did like Night Riders and Martin, and so and he also went on to do both Creepshows, Tales from the Dark Side, and then also a bunch of King stuff, including Pet Sematary. He ended up eventually producing this TV version of The Stand, The Golden Years, The Langoliers, and then also two that I really enjoy and think are underrated in Thinner and The Night Flyer. But so yeah, basically this Richard Lappenstein guy, he was a New York and kind of investor producer sort of dude, and he loved The Stand, and he made it his pet project to produce and to get this made. And they had this very interesting theory. They're like, okay, we are going to make this really low budget independent movie in Creepshow, and it's going to make us a buttload of money, and we will use that to independently finance The Stand as opposed to having to go through the studio system. And that was because studios were just like, I don't know how much money we want to throw at this long-winded, bloated project about the end of the world. And when the suggestion of putting it on TV came out, they're like, yes, we don't really want to see the end of the world, especially in prime time. And, King was averse to the idea as well, because he's like, okay, even if I would have so much more time for character development and stuff like that, I don't want this story selling Charmin. He's thinking about commercial breaks and all that different stuff. And also the fact that it would be significantly defanged and declawed, which was most people's criticism about the 94 ABC version. But, forged forward they did, and after the success of Creepshow, they actually got interest from Warner Brothers to the tune of $15 to $20 million to invest in the production of this magnum opus. The problem was the fact that King could just not turn in a script that was a reasonable length. Even at the 3-hour mark, he still couldn't do that. And I think we all know, everybody who loves what might be Stephen King's best story of all time, I mean, as I've said on this program quite a few times, I basically veer between it, Pet Sematary, and The Stand, because they're also drastically different. One is hopeful, one is somewhere in between, and it's bittersweetness, that being it, and then there is the dark pessimism of Pet Sematary. So, I don't know, they're all fantastic masterworks, but if you're talking about the great American novel of sorts, that is just a sprawling journey across the country and all this different stuff, there's a lot more, I guess, widespread Americana in The Stand as opposed to it, which is more of like that small town affinity, and Secrets it Keeps, which is something King has explored quite a bit. But so eventually, after his last one came in around 700 pages, Lappenstein was like, okay, dude, this ain't happening, we're bringing in somebody else. And he brought in Rospo Pallenberg, who had done some uncredited writing for, I believe it was subtitled The Heretic, which was Exorcist II. He had also scripted Excalibur and directed the classic Cutting Class with Brad Pitt and the actress from Popcorn, and she was in a ton of other stuff. And there's also the Son of Donovan was in that movie. It's a stupid movie, but it's one of those late 80s charmers, so call it what you will. But so Lupenstein brings in Rospo to adapt the script, and then he brings in John Borman, who had won, he either won or he was nominated for a couple different Academy Awards, but most notably Deliverance. And he had worked with Rospo previously on both Excalibur and on Heretic 2, and he was coming off another series of Academy Award nominations for Hope and Glory. And so this is we have at least esteemed pedigree on the directorial side, and Rospo was a big fan of the book The Stand, and so King basically gave it his blessing, and he's like, all right, take my massive novel and condense it into 3 hours, basically. And the second version of the script, the second draft that is at least marked as January of 1990, is the one that Maddie sent me. And that's what I just got done reading shortly before this episode. And it's interesting because this, obviously this was written before the uncut version came out. And another thing I found interesting reading this is that Josh Boone said that when they were finally doing the CBS All Access version of The Stand, that they read every previous draft that all of these different people had done, And you can actually see where some of the ideas, including specific key bits of dialogue, were incorporated from this version that I'm about to briefly discuss and just give a quick play-by-play and some thoughts and impressions of. So it's very interesting to me, though, and this is a point that I had in my notes that I want to make mention of, and I know I've probably said this before, but The Stand is most definitely, in a lot of ways, Stephen King's Star Wars, and I say it like that in the fact that just like George Lucas went back and tinkered with stuff and, you know, some new effects and, you know, blah, blah, all these different things, and allowed for just continuing on, and whether it was the expanded universe as now Legends, or, you know, even like the sequel trilogy and all this different stuff. And King, whether he was just revamping some stuff for the paperback, or which was 85 if I remember correctly, or even with the uncut and changing some references and, you know, pop culture bits and whatnot, and yet also the age disparity between Stu and Franny becoming so much wider and weirder and whatever. But yes, King, he has kind of treated The Stand like Star Wars, and that's really very apparent in just stuff that he was okay with, because you have to know he had final say in a lot of ways with this new CBS version. But to discuss the film that was never made, the theatrical version, 136-page script that was put together and that ended up falling apart and just didn't end up being made. However, the project forged forward, and eventually in 1994 we got the ABC version, and that's where I will pick up in our second installment. But for now, let's just give a quick play-by-play about Rospo's script and things that he did, things that he didn't do, and so on and so forth. So basically opens up just like the original version of the novel, not the uncut version, because the uncut version with the circle opening and everything, it actually details, you know, our military escapee who spreads the virus. Whereas in this, it basically opens right in Texas, cars swerving, and it's interesting because at the Arnett gas station, Stu and all his buddies are listening to Baby Can You Dig Your Man on the radio, and they're like giving their thoughts on it, and they're like, he's trying to sound country and blah, 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 and so I thought that was kind of amusing. And obviously, you guys know this story, so I'm only going to give just like the quick, because at 136 pages, this is The Stand in Cliff Notes, and in so many ways just epitomizes the fact that this story cannot be told, at least as far as giving all of the characters their proper due and their diligence and their just their rich development and stuff. And so there's a very deliberate choice that is made here. Obviously, you know, crash into the gas station and everything, and Arnett is quarantined very, very quickly in this script. And another thing about Rospo's script that I found interesting is it moves. Like, scenes are legitimately like a page or two, couple pages, few pages. The only peeps who really get lengthy bits are, you know, it really focuses initially on Stu and his plight, and then Larry and his plight, and it kind of jumps back and forth, and then we get a little bit of Lloyd, and then, interestingly enough, we get a little bit of Trashy. So it's all men being developed early on in this script. So quick Arnett quarantine, then we jump immediately to California, where Larry is escaping his home and all of his partiers from, you know, the loan shark that is basically trying to like break his hand or something, and he escapes in his Porsche, and this hotsy-totsy he's kicking out at the very beginning is like, you need to go home, Larry, and figure your shit out. And so that's exactly what he does, and then we immediately cut to Stu at the medical facility rebelling against these spacemen, as they're described, you know, guys in these big suits and stuff. And it's interesting because he's like seeing Tom Brokaw muted up on screen and whatnot, but it does this just back and forth, back and forth. So you go from, you know, Stu to Larry, and then we get a little bit of Lloyd here and there, and then we get a little bit of Trashy here and there. So it is cool, though, that we do have Larry stopping at an Oklahoma diner as he's driving to New York, and he's getting some food, and he looks up at the news, and he sees them talking about the flu spreading from California and so on and so forth. But then it also talks about these bank robbers who have killed like 6 or 8 or something like that, and it's obviously Lloyd and Poke, and then it immediately jumps to them having this place all held up, and it's I do like that edit, that like kind of connective editing, in the fact that Larry sees it on TV and then it goes right to the scene. And this is very R-rated. There's F-bombs, there are some grisly scenes of violence here and there, some from the book, some that are kind of done as their own thing. But yeah, they have this place held up, and Poke gets his face blasted off, and then Lloyd is taken into custody, and then it immediately cuts to Stu's first nightmare. And so Stu's first nightmare, he's in a cornfield, and they really play up the whole Cat's Eyes kind of thing here. The bird beaks coming at him, and just, you know, hearing the boots and, you know, whatnot. The beaks obviously make sense because of, you know, the whole, crow or raven or whatever it is. But in a sense, yeah, crows, I believe is the proper term. But yeah, so it's just a very brief first little glimpse into the nightmare situations that will plague our protagonists. Then it's basically, it jumps to Stu versus Creighton. I always forget how to pronounce dude's name. But that's the guy that took them in from Arnett, him and all of his friends. And Stu is like grilling them for questions and everything is classified. So I noted him as classified Creighton or whatever. And yeah, then it goes back to Larry. He's arriving in Manhattan. He has kind of a quarrel with his mom, but then she takes him in. And then it immediately cuts to Trashy. I was shocked that we saw him so early in the script in this Indiana mental institution, but you have to think with 136 pages, like we're talking like not like maybe it'd be like 2.5, 245, because sometimes it's not 1 page per minute if it's more showing of stuff than just like dialogue driven or whatever. But and this is not very dialogue driven. I will admit to that. Rospo has some cool lines for Flag, most like one in particular being taken right from the pages and stuff, or at least some of it, or verbatim. And then you've got stuff with Harold later, Dog Ass His Day, and that God is coming and he's pissed. That's one that we get here in a bit. But I did find it interesting that we meet Trashy so quickly, and he's basically starting fires in the institution and the little trash can, and then he is taking the electroshock therapy, but all of the orderlies and the doctors have what they're describing as the plague. And then we jump to Larry and his sick mom, and then we go right to Lloyd in the Phoenix prison, and the guards are sick, inmates are sick, and then we're back to Stu, and Stu is seeing Brokaw going nuts on TV, and Brokaw basically starts talking about the Black Death is once again loosened upon the land, and he basically gets led away by soldiers live on TV. So that's really, interestingly enough, we get nothing from the military's perspective, which is an interesting bit in the uncut and in the 94 version. I liked seeing their perspective on just the other side of the coin, and the panicking and the guilt and all that stuff. But yeah, government and military is faceless and just pretty much opposition, and really that's the only indication of them that we get, aside from taking everybody out of Arnett. And then this is a bit that I thought was very, very solid in the script, in the fact that we then fall into full New York chaos with Larry, and he finds his mom in Mercy General because he goes to the bodega or whatever, trying to find her because he comes home and she's not there. And then bodega guy's like, yeah, she went to the hospital. He finds her there, and by this point, we just immediately join chaos in New York, and it is described, at least interestingly enough, in the script, however breezed upon and very brief. His mom is there, that the whole hospital is full, doctors are sick, everybody's dying. So it's just quick to chaos within the first 20-something pages of this script, because it has to move quick to, trim that runtime. And and then it just goes through that so quickly, and all of a sudden, as madness is still transpiring, as opposed to in the wake of it, that's when he meets Rita Blakemore. And so he meets her when chaos is still going down, and this is a scene similar to how it was done in the CBS All Access version, where the three muggers come up and they basically want to take Rita and rape her. They go on this chase, he gets her up to her apartment, and then they immediately get down on the bang down and everything. So it moves so quickly just through the chaos, as opposed to really, you're in the thick of it so quickly, and as opposed to a gradual incline like you get in the source material and whatnot, and obviously in some the 94 version. But then we cut back to Stu. Stu finds Creighton, and interestingly enough, he doesn't try to kill him in this version. It's more akin to, it's not like a friendly type of thing like you get in the 2020 version, where they're kind of buddies, but it's not as harsh and I'm gonna kill you, I'm so resentful. There's resentment, obviously. And he even tells Stu, he's like, yeah, we injected you with the virus, we can't figure out why the hell you're still alive. And so Creighton actually leads him out of the CDC in Vermont and helps him to get out there. And Stu sees there's piles of bodies everywhere, and there's burning bonfires in the distance and everything. Full on chaos, obviously. And so it's fascinating how it's well described. I will give it that for the couple paragraphs of description that we get. But it's just the dynamic I found a little intriguing here, because Cretan leads him out and he's like, now kill me, I don't have the heart to do it. And yet Stu just walks away. It's just like, peaceful, I'm not gonna kill you. But Cretan does actually give one interesting bit of insight about how they knew the virus had escaped from California. And there's a lot of exposition we get from Cretan here, because as opposed to showing it and, the like, exposition trims runtime, as opposed to having to actually show these things happening, and it saves on budget too. So he tells Stu about the fact that, yeah, we knew it escaped and we were making this virus, this flu that could mutate, whether by man-made or non-man-made means and all this stuff. And he says we tried to napalm and destroy the car so we could stop the spread, but we ended up getting the wrong car. So I thought that was interesting. And then we cut right back to Rita's apartment, and Larry is watching, and he mentions that Wall Street and Harlem are burning. There's these suicide jumpers from apartments above that are like splattering on the balconies and stuff. So it's very intriguingly described in all of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, and then it just jumps right back to Lloyd, who has already eaten a rat in one of those quick little interludes. They legitimately, we have like half-page cuts to stuff in completely different places, and then we're right back to our main threads of story, which are obviously Larry, and we've got our majors in Larry and Stu, as I said, and our minors in Lloyd, and a little bit of Trashy. And so then it's right back to Larry and Rita, and they're arguing as they approach the Lincoln Tunnel. Still one of my favorite scenes in any Stephen King book ever. They did it tremendously in the Marvel comic book, actually. I thought that was really, really terrific. And so, yeah, man, I just have to give that some major credit. And we don't even get the Walking Dude until nearly 40 pages in, which is legitimately crazy. And then we've got the, when Lloyd sees him, he is askewn. Flag is askewn for pretty much the predominance of this of these proceedings, and you don't even see him like actually fully revealed until he meets Nadine near the very end, and he brings Lloyd with him, and then we get some Stu dreams of Mother Abigail for the first time, only to be awoken by Kojak. And that's one thing I'll say: there's no Glenn Bateman. Breaks my heart, man. Kojak, the last dog on earth. Then we've got Larry and Rita on their bikes. They crash, and in this version, she injures herself after the crash, and she does not purposefully take all these pills to commit suicide. She actually does it because she is she is hurting so much, and so it's implied to be an accidental overdose, which I found kind of interesting. And then Larry dreams of Mother Abigail and Flag, only to awaken to Rita dead, and that's what we get. 44 pages in, that's where Stu finally meets Harold and Franny, and they're popping pills so they don't have dreams, and they're en route to Nebraska. Trash is blowing stuff up, injured, and then he dreams of Flag, and Flag tells him to go west to be his fireman, and so that's an interesting little bit. Then we have Larry dreams of, he has this dream about all these scorned women coming and like tearing all of his limbs off, and then Flag's like, I'm the only one who can put you back together, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then he awakens to Nadine and Joey finding him, and then we get so little from Tom Cullen and Nick Andros in this. It is literally a heartbreaker. They get maybe a couple scenes, they're like banging gongs by the time we actually get to Boulder, but it's tragically terrible. Julie eventually ends up showing up, and she doesn't really get much to do until later when she hooks up with Franny. But yeah, and it's just so weird. Nadine thinks that Larry is her Ouija man initially, and then she pulls back and she doesn't want anything. She's like, keeping Larry at bay, and then Julie shows up, and it's interesting that we do still, excuse me, not Julie, Lucy ends up eventually showing up. I was thinking Julie for her brief little tryst with Nick Andros, but yeah, that scene plays out very quickly, and it's really the only major scene we get from Tom and Nick together. It's really heartbreaking, and Tom never says M-O-O-N the entire damn time. It's terrible. So yeah, by this point, we've got, Larry and Nadine, and they get their bikes, and Joey starts learning guitar, so that's at least cool. Joey/Leo, everything there. And then we have the Franny Prego reveal. They meet Susan Stern and Dana Jurgens, who end up becoming an item, but Susan Stern doesn't even have a single line of dialogue. Dana becomes a much more crucial component here. Mother A dreams of, and they never even call him Flag until near the very end. He's the walking dude throughout the entire script. But Mother Abigail doesn't even have any dialogue until like halfway through the movie, where one scene from the book with the wolves and stuff, and wolves and the weasels, and there's also crows, they all attack her home. And she awakes to find the first of the arrivers, and one of them, a bearded man that I presume is Ralph Brentner, but he doesn't get anything else, throughout the entire time. So that's kind of lame, and she makes her big meal, slaughters the pigs, fries the chicken, all that stuff. And then we have a simultaneous arrival of both Trashy and Julie, and they see the crucified people, crows picking out eyeballs and stuff. And then we jump to Fran and Stu, and they hook up, and Harold's pissed, and he has his first dream of the walking dude and the sentiment of every dog has his day and all of that. But then we make this huge jump in time, which is incredibly aggravating, and we jump to Stu and Mother Abigail in Boulder. So we jump all the way to Boulder, and Stu is the sheriff, and Larry and his Ka-Tet finally arrive. They sing the national anthem, and then all of a sudden Mother Abigail's lost. Like, this all happens within the span of a few pages of the script. All of these big, like, significant plot beats. They're all searching for Mother Abigail. Stu and Harold are out, and it's like Stu's trying to be cool, invites him to dinner, all of that stuff. But once again, all of this stuff happens in a flurry, like so friggin' quickly. And then we have Nadine and Harold. They start to plot. They have their little hookup and tryst and whatever. Leo, obviously, as Joe is become known, his real name now, he shines and he suspects, and so he tells Lucy and Franny go, and they investigate Harold's basement, and before they can see the full extent of it, him and Nadine return back, and the two ladies escape before they can find out what's going on. And then just the back half of this just really goes into high gear. Nick takes over Leo and Tom's voices after the bomb is planted, and the bomb is planted, it all just boom, boom, boom. So quick, such big pivotal events with the quickness. Nick basically jumps on the bomb and sacrifices himself. We all know the key component of that, but it doesn't feel very earned because he has done nothing, absolutely nothing in this script, and it's just heartbreakingly horrible. And in this, Mother Abigail is injured in the blast and is on the verge of death, and Stu and Dana, interestingly enough, and Tom and Larry are the ones who go because no Glenn Bateman, heartbreaker. Kojak goes with them, obviously, and they head west. Nadine and Harold, that they're on the run. Harold has his quick death, and the four sojourners west, they see his dead body, but it's really about it. She speeds on, she meets Flag. He pulls out his demon dragon dick, and she freaks out, and he's like floating with her and impregnating her, and it's so nasty and insane. But then there's another weird bit where our four walkers, they see this fighter pilot going across the sky, and Dana distracts him by pulling out her boobs, her goodies, and he sees naked woman and crashes and escapes last minute. Flag gets pissed because, they have this aerial assault that they've been planning that's only briefly hinted at in the script, never really talked about very much, which is aggravating, and Flag just blows a hole in this dude. And that's where you start to at least see the only signs of splintering, and the fact that Lloyd's lieutenants are like, yo, this dude's unstable, how well does he actually have the shizzle together here? And then they decide to split up after being seen by these fighter pilots. Dana goes to try to catch up to Tom, who's ridden ahead. Stu and Larry veer off together, and they're basically trying to get to Vegas themselves now. Dana has her tryst with Lloyd and is killed, but once again, it just jumps to just a beat here, and we're like, oh, Dana's suddenly with Lloyd. Okay, cool, and then she does a little glass thing. We all know this bit. And there is an interesting exchange with Stu and Larry, where Larry finds a guitar when they're in Arizona, and he starts strumming Baby Can You Dig Your Man, and Stu's like, hey, I remember that from shortly before everything, went to shit. And he's like, have you ever heard it? And are you familiar with it? And Larry's like, no, I don't know that song. I thought that was kind of funny. And Trashy's loose screw, obviously. He blows up a pyramid, and he kills Julie Dwyer in the process, I said Julie Dwyer. It's because I watched Mallrats the other day. Julie Lowry. And Flag is like, no, it's fine. Just, he'll come back and we'll forgive him, and we'll get all of our ducks in a row. Stu breaks his leg. That whole beat still happens in this. And, we are doing the whole quartering of people, like in the original book, where they tie each person's limb to a vehicle and they just tear them into pieces. And Larry solo arrives at the very end of this in Vegas, and there's all the signs showing that he's going to be playing a concert that night. He goes on stage, they tear this woman in the arena to pieces, and then he basically starts talking about how Mother Abigail told us to fear no evil. And in this scene, he incites the crowd to start believing in the fear no evil, and even Lloyd turns and is just like, I'm still an American, I don't believe in this shizzle. Are you seeing a similarity between the CBS version? I thought you were, yeah, and that's because this is most definitely a bit that they took and tossed into this 2020 version of it. In this one, Flag actually, he basically takes this little blue orb and he seals, like cauterizes Lloyd's mouth shut so he can't continue addressing the crowd like that. And then Trashy comes in with the nuke. The orb basically, you know, from Larry saying, fear no evil, the power of God, the hand of God comes, and the orb just kind of Flag's power, like reverses and turns in and blows up the nuke, and, you know, everybody dies, and that's about it. We still get Zellman and the doctor in this for just brief little bits of dialogue here and there, especially near the end, the optometrist and then the doctor, but yet we have no Ralph aside from the one bearded man reference. We have no MOON, we have no Bateman. And then it basically ends. At least we get a little taste of Tom and Stu going through the snow in the winter. So there is a hint of just a montagey extent of journey before they return to Franny having her baby. And the end, they're just like, they're all happy. And one of them says, and we've learned so much. I think it's the optometrist who says that. And Larry's like, really? Like what? And then Leo says, like, we can't help being happy. And they all smile, fade out, the end. This is as if, like, if they can still do a series that is 9 hours and it still feels rushed, how do you think a script for 136 pages was gonna go, man? So I'm glad that I finally got to see this, but like, if you think the CBS All Access version was Cliff Notes, all laws, man. MOON, that spells rushed, and there is no way in hell that even the original 500-something page version of The Stand could do justice to this story in 2.5 hours, let alone even something 9 hours. It's just crazy. I extend a grande gracias for anybody who tuned into this video and heard my thoughts on the insane breezy rush that was the 1990 second draft of Rosbo's version of The Stand that was thankfully, thank the Lord in heaven, never made into a feature film. The 1994 version is superior in every fashion, even if it wasn't R-rated like this one was with some of the extreme violence and the F-bombs and whatever. But yes, there will be 2 more installments on this, covering the Ben Affleck-y version that there is a script from, I think, 2013 for, and then there was also the 2017 script, I think, for Josh Boone and his various installments that he wanted to do it in. But we will cover those in parts 2 and 3 on the history of The Stand on screen. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. Make sure to check out the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group because Dreamcatcher is the book of the month here in February, first Saturday of March. We will be discussing it in full. Like, share, subscribe. Greatly appreciated, Ka-Tet. And yeah, until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, cinemigos, constant readers and viewers alike. Say thank you for the palaver here. Hopefully we share more of it sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. Although, even if you track it down, I mean, unless you're like insanely curious like me, I would not recommend reading this script. But gracias, Maddie. You rock, brother.